Hello and welcome. My name is Dipanjan Chatterjee, and I consider myself incredibly fortunate that I can stand in front of you with a presentation that has these three words stitched together: race, gender, and brand. If this were even 4 years ago, this kind of premise would be blasphemy to marketing pundits. Why? Even as late as 2017, the luminaries of marketing were dispensing, bad advice. Consumers, they said, are not really looking for brands to take a position on social issues. Brands don't go there. There's simply too much risk. Now, around that time, Colin Kaepernick had thrown away a perfectly good career by taking a knee. Not too many brands noticed, other than Nike. In 2020, however, someone else took a knee, and that caused quite a stir. While visiting a bank branch, the CEO of JP Chase, Jamie Dimon, took a knee in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Hold on now. I know what many of you are thinking. The CEO of JP Chase takes a knee? Come on. I will tell you this. Don't worry about judging the act, but consider the significance of the symbol. Consider how we went from brands not caring to the most powerful man in one of the most powerful banks in the world taking a knee for Black Lives Matter. So, how did we get here? It does seem like 2020 was a turning point, but let's face it, what happened to, say, George Floyd was dreadful, but it was not the exception. There have been countless George Floyds before. In one of Hemingway's novels, The Sun Also Rises, a character goes bankrupt. On being asked how that happened, this is what he has to say. I went bankrupt 2 ways, he says. First, gradually, and then suddenly. What happened in 2020 was sudden, but there were 3 very gradual forces at play. Let's explore each of them in some detail. Number 1, the institutions around us are crumbling. Now, you've heard some version of this before. We don't trust governments, we trust brands more. But there's more to it than that. The marriage rate in the United States, for example, is at an all-time low in its recorded history. In Sweden, like in many countries, people, especially younger ones, have lost faith in religion. In Japan, loneliness is a plague. You know, there's this terrifying phenomenon known as lonely death, where the elderly are discovered dead in their homes only by the smell of putrefaction. Half of all Americans report no meaningful human social contact every single day. Institutional decay has left behind a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. So what happens next? Brands rush in. Brands step in to fill this vacuum. Here's a good way to think about this. Let's rewind 20 years. The top 5 public companies by market capitalization were GE, ExxonMobil, Pfizer, Cisco, and Citigroup. These are highly functional, highly transactional companies. You didn't really have folks, loving a Pfizer or loving a Cisco. Now, let's fast forward to 2020. Here are your top 5 publicly traded companies. Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, or Google, Facebook, right? Now, that they are all tech companies is a red herring. They are actually relationship brands. And I say this because they are entangled in our lives like brands have never been before, like GE has never been, like Cisco has never been. These brands are how we connect with people. They are there with us at all our memorable moments. Moments when we laugh, moments when we cry. Now, this is my favorite example. So for many people and their kids, there is a new member of the family. And this new member lives in a box. It's a box that some of us call a smart speaker. Now, when brands become members of your family, they inherit very different expectations. And it is these expectations that are rapidly changing. That brings us to the third force, and one that French social scientist Emile Durkheim has called collective conscience. The set of values that the average citizen holds dear has been shifting. Now, a lot of this is driven by demographic change. For example, the United States today looks very different from what it did when I came here for college in the late 1980s. So, for example, today, the minority make up the majority of the children in this country. As society becomes diverse, it changes how we think about the world around us. When we look through the prism of brand and marketing, we no longer just want to see ourselves through it. We want to see an accurate depiction of the society we live in. For example, in the United Kingdom in 2016, 30% said that it was important for marketing to represent modern-day society. 30%. In 2019, that number jumped to 51%. Our ideas about gender have changed dramatically as well. Now, to me, this is a mind-blowing statistic. 50% of people around the world disagree or are unsure that there are only two genders and not a spectrum in between. Imagine a concept so sacrosanct, so influential in how society is organized. And half of us say, I am not so sure about that anymore. Let's talk about race. If today, about 80% of Americans who are between the ages of 18 and 34 say that brands need to take a stand on racial justice, and then you fast forward 10 years, 20 years, will anyone even be asking questions like this anymore? All right. Now that we have broached the question of race and gender, and before we get to how modern brands are embracing these, let's take a quick detour so we can all start at the same place. Let's debunk the race and gender myth. Neither race nor gender are meaningful systems of categorization. They sound kind of official, but in reality, they are simply narratives. Narratives formulated, refined, dressed up in the fake authenticity of pseudoscience, narratives that usually are used to promote an agenda. For example, the idea of an inferior race has been used at pivotal moments in American history. During the age of exploration, to label native populations as savages. In the early 1600s, to make it seem palatable to enslave human beings, and then in the late 1800s and through Jim Crow to deny rights that were hard-won during Reconstruction. Gender, too, is a narrative. In a classic paper by West and Zimmerman, they write how with gender we create differences that are not natural or essential or biological. Sure, many of us conform to a binary that is aligned with our sex categories of being male or female, but that is not what gender is about. Zimmerman and West coin a powerful term, doing gender. Living by social constructs and expectations that have no real basis in sex. That's why many men would not wear a dress or lipstick, even though there is nothing innately male or female about either a dress or lipstick. More perniciously, it's why little boys are budding Einsteins and little girls are social butterflies who want to be the talk of the playground. All right, let's get back to brands. The gradual and simmering tension over many decades suddenly boiled over in 2020. We saw a huge jump in brands engaging on topics of race and by extension fairness and equality, which then encompass gender. So just to give you a sense of how much more the conversation is heated up, consider this. If you look at all the ad spend on racial justice messaging for 2 years, 2018 and 2019, add it up, multiply it by 5, you still would not get to how much was spent in 1 month in 2020. Now, that's not to say that brands are new to this. In a 2018 Super Bowl ad, Coca-Cola made reference to gender-neutral pronouns and then went on to say, "We are better as we." Now, these may be just words, but do not underestimate their power. Consider the size of the platform that the Super Bowl is. Consider how large a megaphone Coca-Cola has. Mega brands create legitimacy through popular culture. And the words of brands like Coca-Cola matter a whole lot. Where you don't want to be is in the shoes of Quaker Oats. You drag your heels, reluctant to ditch an offensive brand icon. And then when the heat gets turned up, you relent. You have to be better prepared than that. The forces of change that I describe surround us. So as a company, you have to be proactive, you have to be prepared. Allow me to do 2 things. First, I want to provide you a framework for systematic change. And then second, I want to offer you some very practical advice based on my research and work with many leading brands on these topics. If you want to think of this as a systematic initiative rather than a knee-jerk response, you should really think of it in 3 layers. First, how will you address race and gender within your own company? Second, how will you address these needs for your customers? And then number 3, can you and will you make a meaningful contribution to your community? Let's look at some examples. When you look within a company, the first step, this work typically takes on the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, IBM is a true vanguard in this space. They wrote their first equal opportunity policy in 1953. That's 1 year before Brown versus Board of Education was even settled. that's more than a decade before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. IBM added gender expression, mind you, not just gender, but gender expression, to their non-discrimination policies nearly 2 decades before the Supreme Court ruled that the original Civil Rights Act protected LGBTQ workers. Now, let's look outside of the company and extend this to customers. MasterCard has a product called TrueName. And what TrueName does is it allows transgender customers to have their chosen name on their credit cards. Look, if this doesn't affect you, you probably do not realize how much of a deal this is. Imagine being told by a company that you patronize that they refuse to acknowledge who you are, that they refuse to acknowledge your identity. TrueName, which is now used by banks like Citibank, is changing all of that. Here's another customer example. Airbnb. Airbnb is not your traditional hospitality company. They are a market maker, they're a data and analytics powerhouse. Airbnb has an ongoing initiative called Project Lighthouse. And what they do with Project Lighthouse is they use advanced statistical models. And they use these models to analyze data on their platform to identify and root out discrimination. Go one step beyond the customer. Think of the community. This is where you step outside of your immediate realm of commerce and into the broader society. Let's take Microsoft as an example. Microsoft has been active in contributing to criminal justice reform well before 2020. So they take what they know best and what they do best, which is technology, and they apply it broadly. As an example, they have worked with the Department of Corrections in Massachusetts, and they have created these virtual reality programs that offer inmates a simulated re-entry scenario. Microsoft has worked with Washington State's court system to build technology solutions that help judges improve fairness in determining legal financial obligations. Now, there is a big learning here across all of these best practices that I related to you. Make a difference with what you do best. For Airbnb, that's data and analytics. For MasterCard, it's financial products. And for Microsoft, it's all about technology. Now, in conjunction with building a systematic approach to address race and gender in modern brand thinking, let me offer some pragmatic and even tactical advice. So I have for you 4 guiding principles. First, be honest, be humble. So just a few weeks ago, I heard Walmart's CEO, Doug McMillon, deliver a keynote at CES. He spoke of the racial equity training that they do at Walmart, and this is what he said. He said, I learned a bunch of stuff about American history that they did not teach me in high school. Now, many of you may not hold Walmart up as an exemplar in social causes. But humility and honesty from that one person who can make the most difference is a fantastic starting point. Principle number 2, stay intimately, inextricably connected to the business. Don't mistake all of this to be an exercise in marketing communication. I mean, this is not about finding the right sentiment to broadcast to the market. In some ways, think of this as a classic marketer. Think of it as the 4 Ps. How should I change my product offering? Like Mattel has done in the gender-neutral dolls that they have created. Think of it as what should you do with your shopping experience? Like Target has done for years, stripping its store of gender constructs for boys and girls. Think of the customer experience, like United has done. When you book your ticket on United Airlines, you no longer get to choose only between male and female for your gender. You can choose undisclosed and you can choose unspecified. Here's my third tip for you. Sweat the details. Don't forget, all of the things that you say, all of these policies that you make, they will need to become practice. And things can get messy when the rubber hits the road. Starbucks said Black Lives Matter, but then they vacillated in whether employees could freely express that sentiment and how they could do it. Same story for Taco Bell. So, think through every little operational detail of what will happen when what you say actually comes to life. And then here's my final bit of advice. In all of my work with marketers, I always tell them, stay laser focused on the customer. Be outside in. In this case, however, I urge you to look deep within yourself. Like Chris Miller from Ben & Jerry's says, yes, it makes sense to build strong connections with your customers, but it only really works if you mean it. You can keep chasing your customers' values, but if your heart is not in those values, then you will get left behind. Thank you so much for your time and attention. These issues are central to my research and to my work. So if you'd like to know more about them, you are welcome to reach out and contact me. Thank you, and I hope our paths will cross again.